Welcome to the Doyenne of Death Podcast, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. It's all about end-of-life issues and getting the conversation started about our 100% mortality rate. This series is hosted by Gail Rubin, certified thanatologist and the Doyenne of Death. A doyenne is a woman who's considered senior in a group and knows a lot about a particular subject. So here to talk about the subjects we sometimes avoid is author, speaker, and the Doyenne of Death, Gail Rubin.
Welcome back. I'm so excited to be speaking with Greg Bennick. He is a keynote speaker and author of the book Reclaim the Moment, 7 Strategies to Build a Better Now. He's also very knowledgeable about Ernest Becker, the author of the Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Denial of Death, a sociologist who encapsulated so many incredible ideas. Greg, great to be continuing this conversation with you.
This is awesome. I'm loving it. It's fantastic to be here.
This part, we're going to talk about pearls before swine. Stephan Pastis is a cartoonist who works actually a lot of Becker's ideas into his work. In fact, my first book, A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, was based on one of his cartoons. I actually got permission to use the cartoon on the cover of my book, where Rat, who is always coming up with these ideas, says, oh no, it's the pig. It's the pig and the zebra having a conversation. Pig says, I have big plans for my life. And the zebra says, like what? And pig says, like not dying. I don't plan to die. And they sit there and think about this for a panel. And the zebra says, we have no choice, pig. We die whether we want to or not. And then pig says, that's going to affect my other plans.
Yeah, that's right.
And
it does. Gets in the way.
Well, and because even though 100% of us die, less than 30% of adults do any end-of-life planning. And in fact, I do want to talk about this other Pearls Before Swine cartoon, but before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about self-esteem and the terror management theory and this idea of confronting our own mortality. I had actually heard Jack Canfield give a talk where he cited a study, which I have not found lately, about self-esteem, and that 30% of adults have good self-esteem. And he said, look to your left, look to your right. One of you is okay, 2 of you are in trouble. And then I think about, well, if 30% of adults are doing end-of-life planning, does that mean you need to have good self-esteem to consider your own mortality and do something about it?
Okay, so this is a whole can of worms, and we'll dive in. We'll dive in succinctly. When we think about self-esteem, I think traditionally we think about I feel good about myself, or I have self-confidence, or I am making my way through the world in a way that makes me feel good about myself. And I think from a Becker's standpoint, I think that when we think about self-esteem, we're thinking about ourselves in the world and the relationship between ourselves and the world. We're thinking about not necessarily the literal self-esteem of I feel confident about myself and my abilities, but we're thinking more about what is my place in the world? What is the being of Greg? And I know that sounds very abstract, but I'm trying to suggest that self-esteem, according to Becker, is not just a conscious choice, but a subconscious choice. How is Greg being today? Well, I'm being in a way in which I feel good about the things that I'm engaged in. I feel happy about the things that I have going on in my life. I feel directed and focused, because I think that I'm living with less harm than I could if I just ran rampant through the world. So I feel I feel pretty good. And self-esteem is buried in there somewhere. It's not necessarily conscious. It's almost subconscious in a way. This is important because in the last section, we talked a lot about death, defensiveness, and denial. But the other side of the coin is when we feel as though we're connected to something, when we feel as though we matter, when we feel as though we are part of something meaningful, the self-esteem boost that we get is internal, perhaps subconscious, but most definitely present, at least in my opinion. And I think Becker's too. And what that does is it creates a situation where if I'm feeling pretty good and I've got my listening pretty well attuned to others, say that's part of it, and you are too, we can come together and we can work together. If I'm not feeling good about the way where I'm at in the world, if I'm on an errant path, if I'm immersed in frustration, if I'm rooted in agony, well, then I'm going to interact with you in a very different way potentially. And that doesn't mean just be happy, but it means if we can integrate more of the death and denial thoughts, if we can sort of work with them in a way where we're not acting openly defensively toward them, then hopefully we can get to a point where we feel good about the things that we're doing throughout the day and be embracing of other people as well, rather than pushing them away, be in any sort of antagonistic or aggressive stance against them. We're all proverbially in this together in terms of our mortality, and how we navigate through that is directly connected to how we are being in the world.
Wow. That is mind-boggling.
I hope in a good way. I hope mind-boggling in that it made sense.
Yeah.
Good.
So we have this other Pearls Before Swine cartoon with Rat standing on a podium, not a podium, standing on a column with a sign on it that says "Gift to the Ages," for the ages. And Goat walks up to Rat and says, "What is this?" And he says, "My greatness doesn't get its due, so I'm reminding the world of my importance." And Goat says, "Why?" And Rat says, "Because that's the goal of every being on Earth, to leave their mark, to be significant, and in doing so, gain some measure of immortality." Oh, I hear these themes. And in the next panel, it says, "You think that's everyone's goal?" And Rat says, "I know it is. It's what each and every one of us strives for in everything we do." And then they look over and they see Pig sitting behind a desk with a sign that says, "I just want to make one person's day better." And Rat says to Goat, "He might not be sane."
Okay, so this speaks to what we were just talking about, right? We all will cause harm. And I talked about being openly aggressive or antagonistic to others. We are all going to cause harm. You, me, my mom, my dad, my brother, everybody. We're all going to cause harm on some level today, in this hour, in this minute. We're all going to cause undue harm. We're all going to cause intentional harm if we yell at somebody on the highway, whatever it might be. We are all harm-causing creatures all the time. But we are also rational creatures. We are also heartfelt creatures. We are also compassionate creatures. I'm convinced of that. And as a result, we can mitigate and diminish the harm that we cause to others. And in fact, we can elevate what we offer to others. And when we make a mistake and cause harm to others, we can completely reverse that. We can work to make it better again. So this cartoon is awesome, because it's almost not a cartoon in a way. This is kind of how we need to be thinking, in my opinion. I think that we need to be thinking not just in terms of inflating ourselves, establishing a permanent presence for ourselves in the world, again, a permanent presence for a temporary creature, because sometimes that's where we step on each other's toes. Well, I need to make sure that I get this interview, because if someone else gets it, then I don't get to live on in digital form, speaking to Gail about these important ideas, which make me look so cool, whatever it is. We can make another choice. Instead, we can get that self-esteem that you were talking about, not just from ego inflation, but from being generous. If I'm going to be, with somebody else and make their day better in whatever capacity it is, or listen to them, or acknowledge them, or see them, or recognize them, and I make them better, there's a psychological component for me too. that makes me feel good. It might not be winning an Oscar, being the first person to, climb Mount Everest, while juggling, whatever it might be. I might not be that person, but I most definitely, it's the same structure, find a self-esteem boost and a sense of meaning and mattering through the generosity I offer to somebody else. This in the midst of being harm-causing creatures. So I think that cartoon sums up quite a lot.
It really does amaze me how Before Swine as a cartoon speaks to so much of the human condition. What else could we say about our self-esteem and addressing our mortality that maybe we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I think we can't reiterate enough the fact that feeling as though we matter, feeling as though we are doing meaningful things, or rather feeling as though we are part of a meaningful universe and that we matter within it, the importance of that cannot possibly be stressed enough. It's essential. It's essential to what we do. Meaning, if I didn't have a sense that this interview was going to lead to something good for somebody else, or for that matter, if I didn't have a sense that that this was going well and that I was going to be excited about it and I was going to share it with my friends, then we need to be doing other things. And I think that's important to think about. The work that we do, the relationships we have are hopefully toward an end of improving the world, improving our lives, improving another person's experience, whether we're selling or developing a product or offering an emotional connection, whatever it might be. I think that feeling as though we matter, and I don't just mean I'm so cool, but rather that my existence on this earth has meaning in a world that is filled with people striving for meaning, and that we're all doing this together, hopefully without harming and diminishing each other more than we inevitably will. I think that's where the self-esteem piece resides. I think that as we go through our lives and try to do things that are meaningful, if we can do them in ways that don't diminish the ability of other people to do meaningful things, and if we can stop and listen to one another from time to time and connect with them and listen to their experiences, we're going to get a self-esteem boost as well. And it doesn't need to come from stepping on others in order to make sure that we cross the finish line first.
Boy, and don't we need that in this world today?
We do.
I know it's pretty anxiety producing, the conflict and the misunderstandings and the anger that's being directed in so many directions from so many sources. How can we step back and find that self-esteem, find that connection?
I think that the stepping back is really important. And one thing that I talk about, and I know in my book, and this isn't the book pitch part of my interview with you, but one thing I talk about in my book is the connection between when we focus and the self-esteem that we find, the connection between the two, in that, for example, when we focus for a moment, we feel as though we're connected to something meaningful rather than being scattered in so many directions. And in focusing and being connected to something meaningful, we're back to what we were talking about 2 minutes ago. Oh, I'm connected to something that matters. Okay, this is meaningful for the person I'm working with, the person sitting across from me, for me, what have you. When we strip away some of the distractions that are all around us, we get to a place of focus. And in that place of focus is the self-esteem that we've been talking about, at least a boost of it. Here's the problem, is that there's lots of people who spend a lot of money to keep me unfocused and to keep you unfocused and to keep our eyes on different things, whether news headlines or politics or the latest update on whatever conflict is happening around the world. There's lots of people who spend a lot of money to keep our eyes on screens because there's products from advertisers that are going to sell on those screens. And I think it's important to step away from screens from time to time. I think it's important to step away from those concepts from time to time and reassess our position, reassess where we're at and what we want, what we're doing and why. And when we do that, that's where we're going to encounter self-esteem psychologically, overtly or, subconsciously, that's where we're going to encounter that. Not when we are immersed in trying to figure out every single angle on every single story in the world. Because the fact of the matter is, this sort of chaos has always been there. It's just enhanced now because we find ourselves in a situation where it's just a deluge, a constant flood of ideas coming at us. Becker had his greatest inspiration, I would say, was a guy named Otto Rank. And Otto Rank, who I mentioned in the first section, who had written Art and Artist. Otto Rank said around 1910 or so that the world was basically suffering from an overabundance of truth that could not possibly be consumed. There was just too much information out there. In 1910, he was talking about books. There was too many books. He couldn't possibly read them all. He couldn't navigate through them all. What would Otto Rank say about TikTok? What would Otto Rank say about the constant 24-hour day, even just going back 20, 30 years, the constant 24-hour day news cycle? What would Otto Rank say about you can insert here whatever you envision when you think about distractions? He would be completely overwhelmed. So I think it's critically important, and I talk about this in my keynotes, to get back to focus, to get back to a place where we have at least a little bit more of a singularity about what we're doing and why. I missed that. I know there's a lot of thoughts to think about, but I think it's critically important that amidst a world of distraction, that we return to a place of being centered.
Oh, amen to that. And I've heard a lot of grief educators talk about get out in nature, just enjoy the natural world, feel the sunshine, hear the birds, feel the breeze. I can see how that would be a way of helping you focus.
Yeah, even if it's for a minute. Because what I'm not saying is do away with technology. I'm as connected to my phone as anybody. I am as connected to the internet as anybody, right? We know that it facilitates conversations like this one. It uplifts us, it educates us, it informs us, and it connects us. All true. And at the same time, I most definitely, between my call with you today and my next one in an hour, will at some point go outside and breathe some fresh air, walk around the block, go up to the vegetable stand up the street, say hi to people, and then come back. It's really, really important to have a mix of both so that we don't get fully consumed and, as a result of what we're looking at, distracted from what is most meaningful to us. Now, if what's most meaningful to us is AI development, is software development, is app development, is something related to our technology, fantastic. But let's always remember, too, that there are other elements of the world and people in it that we can interface with other than the one that is right in front of our face, because sometimes the thing that's right in front of our face is not necessarily what we chose to be there. It's placed there. And that can be detrimental over time when we're not making choices for ourselves about what we really want to focus on.
Join us for the next episode with Greg Bennick as we continue the conversation about Ernest Becker and the denial of death and our mortality.
Thank you for joining us on the Doyenne of Death Podcast. You can find episodes of this podcast and past episodes of A Good Goodbye with Gail Rubin on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on Gail's work, visit agoodgoodbye.com.